page 116, second to last paragraph, begins with the word dot is thus the faculty. Dot is thus the faculty. Does anyone want to read? Anyone?
I'll read if nobody else wants to, but
Please.
is that all right?
Yes, absolutely.
All right.
It's okay.
Go ahead, Margot.
That is thus the faculty to reach conclusions. The perpetual activity of Chachma and Bina does not yield any conclusive deductions. At most, Bina reaches intermediate conclusions between one cycle of thought and the next, which are without a defined beginning and end or any specific direction. Perpetual mating of Chachma and Bina, whether in the soul of man or in the supernal Sifriot, does not generate any definitive deductions, only an awareness. This is where the pivotal attribute of dot comes in. Dot is the capacity to reach a conclusion, to impart an intellectual and moral bottom line to the abstract and undefinitive ideas of Chachma and Bina.
Continue on,
Okay.
continue on one more paragraph. Go ahead.
Without dot, there can be no realization of the person's Chachma Shlema, his full structure of mental and emotional attributes. A person might have highly potent faculties of Chachma and Bina, but a lack of dot would prevent him from applying these powers to the direction and development of his own personality. So although dot does not add anything to a person's perception and understanding, its importance to the integrity of the soul's inner life is decisive. It provides the link between the various attributes, between the mind and the midot, lower dot, and between Chachma and Bina themselves, higher dot.
Good. Okay, so dot, beyond what we explained, dot is also a conclusion. That's to summarize these two paragraphs. What does that mean? That means that da'at is really the conclusion of the thought process. And but I will add one adjective to that conclusion, and that is that sometimes that conclusion is unexpected or a surprise conclusion. Why? Because after I've implemented my thought process to into this world, into someone else, then that someone else might see my thought process in an entirely different way that I saw it. And therefore, the conclusion, as will be implemented by that someone else, might be very different than the way I saw it. And the carrying out of this idea will be maybe channeled in a way that I never thought of before. Now, therefore, that is not just a conclusion, but it's also a conclusion that may entail many, many surprises. You know, Rabbi Steinsaltz, I've heard him say this many times, of course, the author of this commentary. He says that he's met a lot of people who are on paper very clever with 7 PhDs and have all these titles, but they are the biggest fools he's also ever met. Now, how could that be? I mean, to the untrained ear, that sounds like a contradiction. But learning about this now, we can understand exactly what this means. You may have 7 PhDs and be very clever in developing your ideas in your own mind. But when they are finally carried out, you have no clue on how to carry them out, on how to channel them, how to ensure that they do fit the people that you are carrying them out to, how they do fit this world in general. You remain up there. How about coming down here? There's complete foolishness when it comes to that. There's a beautiful Hasidic, and by the way, I want to connect this to Shavuot because I think Shavuot is all about that, as we spoke about just before Shavuot. But maybe as a prelude to connecting Shavuot to that, I want to share with you the idea about Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the author of the Tanya. But Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi lived with his, you know, as was the custom in the time, not just with his immediate family, with his children, but also with his grandchildren in the same house. And that's the way they lived. Everyone lived together. Now, one day his son, who was already quite older, was studying Torah, and it went on into the night, and he was studying so strongly and so intensely that when his son's son started to cry in his crib, he didn't pay attention. Not only did he not pay attention when he cried, but he didn't pay attention when his grandson, again, fell off the crib and cried even more. Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, again, was living in the house. The grandfather heard the cry. He too was studying. He heard the cry. And he didn't want to disturb his son's learning. So he himself went to his grandson, calmed him down, put him back in his crib. And the night continued calmly. In the morning, he called his son, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi called his son, and he said to him something like, I'm not quoting verbatim, but something like to the fact that, look, if all your learning engages you so deeply in the text that you are not, that you cannot listen to the cry of a young baby, then your learning is worth naught. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson, of blessed memory, would tell this story often in his Farbrengens, almost as a call to all Jews out there, that there are so many people crying in our world today, and instead of being completely closed in our own world, studying Torah all day long, not that you don't have to study, we have to study, but we cannot allow the study of the Torah to deafen our ears from the cries of the people in the world. And we too, when we hear someone crying, sometimes we have to put our books away and go and help that person cry. And that was one of the powerful lessons that Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi told his son, that when you are studying, that's fine, but you cannot study so intensely that you forget the cries of others, the cries of your own child, of your own family. But I'm thinking of this idea because in a way, it connects well here to that. Chochmah and Bina, the first two attributes of the intellect, are the attributes that indeed lead us to studying, and sometimes very intensely. So intensely that Chochmah and Bina can almost block away the world to the point that I don't see it anymore, that I'm completely disconnected from it. But that is almost the savior of Chochmah and Bina. It comes to say, no, your Chochmah and Bina is only good if you're able to, again, proceed now to the next level of, yes, being involved in your study, but at the same time now, through that, opening up your ears to see how this wisdom does not, God forbid, disconnect you from this world, but quite the opposite, it connects you even more so to this world. That's what that is all about. And I'm thinking about Shavuot, because in a way, that's what the Torah, that's what the giving of the Torah really achieved on Shavuot. The Talmud says, and not just the Talmud, other sources, Kabbalah also speaks about how the Torah existed before Shavuot came about. Before the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, 3,333 years ago, the Torah existed. Abraham followed the Torah. Isaac and Rebecca followed the Torah. Jacob and Leah and Rachel followed the Torah. So then why give us something, a document that already existed? What did the big event on Mount Sinai really achieve? We had received the Torah already. Might have been received already by Adam and Eve, according to the Zohar. So what's the big deal of Matan Torah? Of receiving the Torah? The big deal is this, that God said, yes, I gave you a document, but I didn't check with the human beings first to see if it fits. So now I'm going to come down on Mount Sinai and I'm going to ask you, are you willing to receive this Torah? Is it going to fit you? I'm going to exercise my da'at, God was saying, to see if this document is completely disconnected. It's a 7 PhD without any connection to the world. Or is it something that you're able to embrace, something that you're able to truly internalize? And that's why you have that midrash that says that God went to all these nations and asked them, do you want to receive the Torah? And some nations refused. All nations refused except for the Jewish nation. Some said, what does it say in the Torah? The midrash says. God said, well, it says, do not steal. And one nation replied, well, we love stealing. We're all about stealing. So go give it to someone else. And God went from nation to nation until he came to the Jewish nation. And the Jewish nation famously said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will listen. Yes, this Torah fits us. This Torah enhances us. When God said, okay, you are willing to receive it, I'm willing to give it to you, I'm willing to marry you, that analogy that we use also on Shavuot, and then Da'at was exercised, that conclusion was then came into fruition. That's really what Shavuot is about. Preparing this document that we may have in our heads, and this Chochmah and Bina continuing to be developed, but never forgetting the cry of the others and our ability to really connect to the other with Da'at, because otherwise Chochmah and Bina again are worth naught. So that is that type of conclusion, coming or almost unifying ourselves with the other. And then also being open to accepting the fact sometimes that your way of seeing things wasn't really the full, complete way of seeing things. You know, I'll add something that's quite interesting, but again, going back to the Hebrew language, it's fascinating to note that in Hebrew, the word for unity, achdut, also comes from, Kabbalah explains this, Zohar speaks about how achdut, or echad in Hebrew, which means oneness, not unique. Yachid is unique. Echad, which means oneness, also has the ability to connect two opposing forces into one. If you look at the word closely, I do want to mention that this is also one of the reasons, this is where the Zohar gives this commentary. This is one of the reasons we use the word echad in the Shema, the most important prayer in the Siddur, or in Judaism perhaps altogether. When we conclude the Shema prayer with the word echad, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem echad, God is one. What does echad really mean in Hebrew? If you look at the word echad, so you have aleph, which is oneness, right? Which aleph has the numerical value of 1. Then you have chet, and then you have dalet. Chet has the numerical value of 8, and dalet has the numerical value of 4. Now, 1, just think of it mathematically almost. We're not going to calculate here. We're not going to combine these numbers. But this is what the Zohar says. Echad, aleph, chet, dalet. 1, 8, and then 4 alludes to our ability to unify heaven and earth together, to being people that are not only living here, but also living out there. How so? We take our one, who we are, our uniqueness, our unique mission, and then what we do is that we connect it to the number 8. The number 8, I know this is very Kabbalistic, but still, I think it's a powerful idea. The number 8 is infinite. That's what the number 8 stands for. That's why mathematics, maybe that's why mathematics, right? The number for infinity is an 8 lying down, right? So we connect our oneness to the infinity. We recognize that by remaining one, we are remaining finite. It's only when I take my uniqueness, my oneness, the only one person I am, to the infinity out there, that's when I'm starting to become complete, to have this achdut, this complete unity with the world out there. So I have to take my oneness and almost let go of it and immerse myself in this infinity. When I do that, then 4 in Kabbalah represents the 4 corners of the world. And then the world itself, the 4 corners of the world, then also is complete. World itself then comes into, also reaches completion. By me, by every one of us, again, letting go of our uniqueness in order to connect to the infinite out there, the infinite of God, but the infinite in humanity in general, then we are ensuring that the world, that the dalet of the world, then also is complete. When we each do our part in exercising da'at, this is what this means, in connecting to the other, in connecting to that cry of the child, then the world will be complete. The dalet of the world will finally be as complete as possible. That's what echad means according to Kabbalah. But again, you have the idea of da'at in that echad, in that unity between us and the world, between us and God. That's the full unity here being created. Okay, I'd love to hear your comments, your questions, your disagreements, whatever it may be before we continue.
Rabbi, just a quick question about the giving of the Torah and reconciling that with this teaching about the Mount Sinai being held over the heads of the nation. Where does that come from, and how do we accept that and see this as the moment of, like you described it, as such a wondrous moment where we said, yes, we're the nation for you. This elevates us. And the other teaching that Purim is actually where we willingly accepted the Torah again.
Right, right. So I'm glad you brought it up because it's very much connected to this idea of that. So the Midrash says, the Talmud says, it's not the Midrash, the Talmud says, I mean, Talmud and Midrash are often synonymous, but the Talmud says that when we, just before we received the Torah, God uprooted the mountain of Mount Sinai and placed it above our heads. In the words of the Talmud, Kafalem har kegigit. And then he said, either you accept this Torah and then I'll free you from destruction, or if you don't accept it, this mountain will fall on your heads and you'll all be crushed. Kafalem har kegigit. That's what the Talmud says. Now, what's interesting is the timing of it more than anything, Jordan, because when God uprooted the mountain and placed it over our heads and threatened us with destruction, after we already had accepted the Torah upon ourselves, we said to God, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will listen. But what's the point of him doing this now? When we already said, God, we said yes. What do you want from us? What's this threat all about? Right? So you have multiple answers to this question. Answer number one is that no, God wasn't threatening the Jewish nation. He was forming a chuppah, because indeed the idea of Shavuot is God marrying us, we marrying God, the ketubah being the Torah. You need the Torah being the ketubah. You need a chuppah. You need a canopy. So that was the canopy. It wasn't a threat whatsoever. It's a nice image. The other one is this, and the deeper commentary is this, and this comes from Hasidic thought, and it's powerful, and it connects. This is what connects to God. And that is that God was saying to the Jewish nation, all right, you accepted the Torah now. You said Na'aseh v'nishma. I understand that. But maybe you said Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will listen. You accepted the Torah because you were on a high. You came to Mount Sinai. You know that you're about to receive the Torah. You started seeing the sound and light show. You're in ecstasy. You're on a high. You feel good about it. So of course you said yes. Let's see if you can accept the Torah when there are mountains above you in life, when you are being forced to fulfill the Torah, when you have to wake up at 7:15 in the morning to come to your soul class, and you don't feel like it. Well, let's see if you can receive the Torah when you feel those mountains in life. So God uprooted the mountain and he said, look, how does this feel now? This is how you're going to feel sometimes in life. Are you willing to receive the Torah even under these conditions? Not when you're in a state of spiritual awakening and ecstasy? Then we said yes. God said, okay, now I know that you'll be a loyal nation. So now I'm going to give you the Torah. And that's really what this image represents. That Torah is not about us being in the mood. If I'm in the mood, maybe I'm learning Torah for me, not for God, right? When I'm in we've spoken about this many times, but when I feel like doing a mitzvah, then maybe I'm doing it for me, to satisfy my good feeling. But when I don't feel like it, that's the real test. And I do it anyway, that's when I'm really worshiping God. And in a way, that's what Da'at is about. That's why I'm saying it's very much connected to Da'at. Da'at is being able to say, it's not about me, not about my feelings. It's not at all about my spiritual awakening. It has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with God, with the purpose that I have in this world, and with the other. That's what that, when we exercise that Da'at from our standpoint, even though we already said Na'aseh v'nishma, but the Na'aseh v'nishma was said because of our good feelings. When we exercise that with this mountain over us, then God said, okay, fine. If you're marrying me now just because you have no feelings whatsoever, then you're marrying me. Now I can stay married with you, and I can get married to you and stay married with you forever. That's what this represents. Yeah. William, you wanted to say something? No, we can't hear you. You're on mute, William. There you go.
First of all, it's 10:15 here in Toronto.
Oh, okay.
I didn't have to get up early.
Good.
How could you do before you listen?
Say that again.
How can you do before you listen?
Oh,
First
I think,
nishma, then lasot.
right. That's a good question, but I think that anyone who's married knows that the answer to that question.
You just do.
Yesterday, I did a whole bunch of things for my wife without even knowing why, without listening. But that's what marriage is about. You do sometimes even when you can't even listen. Not because you don't know how to listen, but because you can't understand what you're listening to. And that's really the ultimate type of marriage. When I do something, even if my understanding says something else, even if my chokhmah and bina led me to a different conclusion, and then I exercise my da'at, and I see that, wow, the conclusion is not at all what I expected, and I do it anyway, and I implement the da'at anyway, that's when I'm truly married. I think that's, I think that's the power. And by the way, it explains, I think, the unique Jewish being throughout history. It's really astounding to me each and every holiday, especially during the high holidays. But let's put it in these terms. Stop a man at a church on a Sunday morning. Some churches are open now. So go into a church, and I'm not suggesting this, of course, but I'm saying stop a man, think about this, and ask him, why are you in a church? Do you believe in God? He'll tell you, of course. Are you religious? Of course, that's why I'm in this church. Fine. Go to a mosque and stop a Muslim and ask him, why are you in this mosque? Do you believe in God? Yes, of course, I believe in Allah. Are you religious? Do you consider yourself? Of course, that's why I'm here. I wouldn't be in the mosque anyway, if not. Now go to a synagogue on Yom Kippur and ask a Jew, do you believe in God? He'll tell you it's complicated. I don't know if I really believe in God. You ask him 1 second, are you religious? Is that why you're here? Me religious? No way. I'm a universalist. I'm not religious. Then why are you here? I don't know. I don't know why I'm here. Something in me tells me that I have to be here.
So true.
My heritage, traditions, I'm here. So here is a Jew that does something nishnase without the nishma. Is he as religious as the Muslim says he is in the mosque, as the Christian says he is in the church? No, not at all. But there's something in us that was ingrained then, 3,333 years ago, that says, you know what? First, Jews do. And then we listen. Sometimes the listening connects us to the original idea, sometimes no. But we understood that on Yom Kippur we show up. Whether we can nishma or not, that's a different question. And I think, again, it's part of our DNA ever since that moment. Now, yes, it's created a lot of psychological issues. That's why all psychologists, I think, were Jewish, except for one, Carl Jung. And all of their patients are Jewish too, because we have this paradox between Naseh and Nishma over generations. But on the other hand, I think it's beautiful that we have people in the world that is as dedicated to deed as could be, because there is no greater marriage than a marriage that's dedicated to deed. Whether the listening is there or not, as long as the deed is there, the marriage can thrive. I think that's why we often say that we're a do-good religion. We really believe in the power of deed. Deed is what makes us who we are. I know that René Descartes said, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Judaism says, I do, therefore I am. That's what we believe. But that's the Naseh. Okay, any other comments, questions? We can otherwise continue, but I'd love to hear. This should be, that's what learning is about. More of a dialogue. No one? Okay. All right, let's continue then on page 117. Does anyone want to read? Top of page 117.
Want to read? I'll read.
Please, go for it. From Margot to Margot. It's great. Go.
That is, one binds his mind with a very firm and strong bond to, and firmly fixes his thoughts on, the greatness of the blessed infinite, without diverting his mind from him. For even one who is wise and understanding of the greatness of the blessed infinite will not produce in his soul true love and awe, but only vain fancies, unless he binds his mind and fixes his thought with firmness and perseverance.
Right, these are the words now of the Tanya. To bind our mind completely with firmness and perseverance to the other, or to the implication of the idea that Chochmah and Bina gave birth to. Now Rabbi Stanz's commentary on this. Let's read this, and then I want to develop this idea too. Go for it.
Dot, as we said, is the soul's connection to a subject, the part of the mind that decides, this relates to me, this is important to me. A person makes this connection by fixing his mind, by focusing on a certain truth and meditating upon it until it becomes an integral fixture of his soul. This fixing of the mind must be constant, for if one diverts one's mind, there is no longer any dot, and the matter is no longer fixed in his soul. The diversion of the mind does not mean that the person's understanding of the matter has disappeared, but that the mind is no longer actively relating to it. As soon as this happens, the mind will cease giving birth to any emotions in the soul. But because the person's understanding of the matter still exists, a person might still imagine that he is experiencing love or awe toward it. This, however, is but a fancy, a sterile thought rather than a true emotion. As a purely intellectual feeling, it does not move a person's soul and does not compel his behavior in any way. Wow.
Okay, so this is speaking about of the intensity of that. We spoke about of the nature of that, the attributes of that, now the intensity of that. What does the intensity of that mean? That means that, okay, so I have Chochmah and Bina, the first two intellectual attributes. Again, think about it in the sense of I have a startup idea. Now I've developed it. The business plan is ready. I have to go and implement it. I go and implement it. What happens then? We said what happens then is different conclusions sometimes that jump at us. By the way, that's why many business geniuses will tell you that this whole idea, I've heard this from quite a few, most recently I heard it from the co-founder of Netflix, a Jewish guy, Mark Randolph, I think is his name. But many of them will tell you that, there is this idea that if you have this genius startup idea in your mind, then you should keep it to yourself. Why? God forbid someone will steal it from you. And many people tell you that they're completely wrong, because you might think that you have this tremendous idea and you're keeping it to yourself, and you don't want anyone to steal it from you. And then you work on it and work on it and work on it, and you actually carry it out. And then you realize that when you carry it out, that it sucks. No one wants it. And because you don't share it, then you had no idea of thinking of knowing what others think. So therefore, when you do have a great idea, when you think you have a great idea, share it. Don't be afraid. People steal it. Then there's ways to go about that. But share it so that you can have that feedback that will tell you what the truth is, whether it is indeed a great idea or not. Now, in a way, that's what that is about, right? That I'm sharing my idea that I've developed in my mind with the world, and then then the feedback comes in. Now, when the feedback comes in, and this is what this is saying, the intensity that Chochmah and Bina had must continue with that. I must take that feedback as seriously as I took my own great idea. And I must implement that feedback as seriously as I implemented my own business plan in my mind on paper. That's where the intensity has to continue. If I don't take this feedback seriously, then I will have killed the idea and divorce Chochmah and Bina from that, again, creating this complete dichotomy that will not allow my idea to continue on to live for another day or for another week or whatever it may be. The intensity, this great intensity in Chochmah and Bina, but that intensity must continue when I receive feedback, especially when I receive feedback that I did not expect, and especially if I receive feedback that's negative. That's called constructive criticism. That intensity of emotion, that intensity of, yes, let's do this. Yes, this is the best idea in the world, must continue then. If it does not continue then I will have almost divorced Chochmah and Bina from Da'at, and therefore essentially killed the idea. This is really what this is saying. Now that's why I think, going back to this paradox between Nasa and Nishma that we said we found in every Jew, including, by the way, I know I spoke about what seem to be unaffiliated Jews, people that show up synagogue on Yom Kippur. They can exist just as much in what you may call hate labels. So not even going to use labels, but Jews that are devout as could be, because they will tell you, they'll be the first ones to tell you that sometimes they also don't feel like waking up in the morning and praying and putting on tefillin. Sometimes they also don't feel like doing that mitzvah, but they do it anyway. So it exists already in our core. But the point is that you do it anyway with the same intensity. You know, we just celebrated Yom Yerushalayim. What was it? A week ago. Yeah, a week, 8 days ago, something, maybe a little more, 10 days ago. Yom Yerushalayim is the day of the liberation of Jerusalem in 1967 after the miraculous 6-day war. And I think it was Moshe Dayan who said, when he came to the Western Wall for the first time after it was liberated, I think he said that, I am by no means a religious Jew. I don't know if I'm quoting, and maybe someone can help me here, if I'm quoting exactly, but he said something like this: I'm by no means a religious Jew, but today, here, being at the Western Wall with tears in my eyes, I'm the most religious Jew one can find. And again, doing that dot with the same level of intensity. That's where the challenge is. When I do things and I don't feel like doing them, and I do them with all the feelings that I can put in it, that's when wonders are created. It's hard because initially you don't feel like it. You were not in the mood, but then you do it anyway, and you put yourself in the mood. That's really when wonders are created. Because in the initial stage, when I felt like it, then it was about me. It wasn't about the other. And therefore it remains in my finite one, in my aleph, not in the chet. When I then do it anyway, when I don't feel like it, if I have no feelings and I do that mitzvah anyway and I do it anyway, then it's great. Deed is far more important than feelings. It's far more important than anything, like we said. And greatness does happen then too, because at the end of the day, the mitzvah was done. But imagine now doing it with all your being, with all your might, even when you didn't feel like it initially. That's when you have da'at. That's when you have true wonders. I will conclude. I know we'll reach the end, but I'll conclude with a midrash that I reread on Shavuot, because on Shavuot we also read the book of Ruth, but it connects to exactly what was said now. The midrash says that there are 3 people that if they had known that the Torah would have been writing about them, they would have done the mitzvah that they were trying to do with all of their hearts, fully, uninterruptedly. Who are the 3 people? Person number 1 is Reuven. Reuven, the older of the 12 brothers. When he heard his brothers plotting to kill Joseph, do you remember that biblical scene? And throwing him in a pit, he said to himself, well, I'm the oldest, I'm responsible for him, but I'm not going to fight with my brothers. So I'm going to go out to the fields, let my brothers do whatever they want, and I'll come back after my brothers have left, and I'll find Joseph in the pit, and I'll rescue him then. By the time he came back, Joseph was already sold to the Egyptians. It was too late for him. Now, again, the Midrash says, if Reuven had known that the Torah was going to write about him and that action, he wouldn't have cared about what his brothers thought. He would have carried Joseph on his own shoulders out of the pit and rescued him. Number 2, Aaron. Aaron is faced now with his brother coming back from exile, and his brother who was recently appointed as the leader of the Jewish people. The Jews are there, and Moses is there coming back from Midian. The Jews are there with Aaron. And Aaron says, should I show my emotions and give a big hug to my brother after I haven't seen him in so long, to congratulate him also that he became the new leader, or not? And he said to himself, no, I won't. Why? Because if I show these emotions, people will think that I'm acting up and I'm just jealous, really, that I wanted to be the leader. He was chosen a leader, so I'm trying to cover this up by exercising a show of emotion. So I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to smile at him. And again, the Midrash says, if Aaron knew that the Torah was going to write about him, he would have jumped all over him, hugged him like Moroccans hug each other. And number 3, that's not what the Midrash says, but that's a nice interpretation. Number 3, He's Boaz. Boaz is living in the land of Judah. He's a wealthy man. And then he has Ruth, who comes to his field, this woman from the Moabite woman, and he falls in love with her. And he says to himself, well, I want to help her. She seems poor. But he only feeds her with some corn, with a very little food. And again, the Torah says that if Boaz had known that he was being written about, he would have fed her calves and meat and everything possible. And that's why the Midrash says when one does a mitzvah, whether he feels like it or does not feel like it, he should do it all the way. Now, the Midrash then continues to ask, but 1 second, the Torah was written already. Who writes about us today? And the Midrash answers very powerfully, when we exercise that type of da'at, and we do it with all our might, even though we don't feel like it, then Elijah the prophet, King Messiah, and God himself writes about our mitzvot that are done with all our hearts, even when we don't feel like it, when we exercise the da'at. Meditate on that for a little bit.